Okay, well, let's get started slowly so that we stick to the time contract. So, warm welcome again to everyone joining us today. As I said, this is the Scaling Growth Analyst briefing focused on digital health innovation in cardiovascular diseases in Europe. My name is Julian Salaberry. I'm the CEO and the founder of Scaling Growth. Scaling Growth is the preferred digital innovation partner to industry, institutional investors, and promising digital health ventures. We're trusted by blue chip clients such as McKinsey, most of the top 20 pharmacos, medical device companies, insurance companies, tech players, financial services companies, etc. We've got global reach with offices in the US, in Europe, where I'm sitting, and in Asia Pac, which is why I was saying that today is a focus on Europe by the European team that are looking at European digital health. We are also running next week a similar analyst briefing for Asia Pac, and at the end of the month we will be doing the same thing for the US. But the US analyst briefing is very special because we have a couple of very senior VIP guests invited to that specific analyst briefing. HealthTech Alpha is powering this analysis. For those of you who are not familiar with HealthTech Alpha, it is the world-leading digital health data intel and insights platform. It's an unmatched catalog of digital ventures, an unmatched data library per venture, and of course a taxonomy that has now become industry standard, giving us the ability to provide our clients and yourselves today with tangible insights, not generalities, not clickbait either. So our clients, by using HealthTech Alpha, are essentially getting better decisions, more alpha, and of course greater productivity. Today's focus, digital health innovation in cardiovascular disease. That is a therapeutic area we are focusing on today. And of course, the overlap and lens on top of that is Europe. It's the only analysis of its kind. No one has done this analysis before, and we pride ourselves on remaining unrivaled and unique in the analysis that we do. It's an in-depth study of digital innovation in a key pioneering TA. We'll come back to that in a minute. But I would just say, for those of you who have been following digital health for some time, you'll remember, of course, the heady days of Alive Core when they launched their single-channel ECG combined with the iPhone many years ago. It's a presentation based on our premium report, so that's the full-fat 70-page of data intel unmatched insights that our paid subscribers get access to. But of course, today we'll give you a pretty insight into some of the elements of that report. And of course, as usual, the scope of analysis is digital ventures that were incorporated after 2002 and are private. So let me introduce, of course, Sarah. Sarah is our head of analytics for Europe, and she is the author of this report. Let me give you a bit of context though first, Sarah, if I may. As we know, cardiovascular disease is still the world's biggest killer. Approximately one person dies in every 30 seconds across the globe. It's a pretty frightening stat. But we are seeing digital health making some inroads in improving the prevalence of this disease. For example, very recently we saw US health system publishing data saying that remote patient monitoring devices were bringing 30-day mortality rates down to 0 for post-heart bypass procedures. So it's very encouraging news. And of course, if we look at the retail side, we know that Apple, for example, is currently selling about 40 million units of its watch every year. So that means that even at a layman level, we all have a cardiovascular digital health device. So Europe. I like to focus on Europe with you, and I know you like looking at Europe, and not only because we live here, because it is really an amazing digital health ecosystem with unrivaled innovation. There's some 3,300 ventures in Western Europe alone. And of course, we've got some CBD champions such as Whittings, the French company, leading the charge. Fabulous talent pool, and of course, a very attractive valuation, particularly at the moment. So with that in mind, and coming back to the very first point I made, let me ask you a quick question, which is, why is digital health innovation in cardiovascular the focus of our latest report? And why did I describe it as a pioneering TA?
You're right. Pioneer is the word that we use in the report to start off and say, why is cardiovascular disease interesting in digital health? Thank you for having me here. It's nice to see all of you. So we're going to start with that. Really, digital health, when it started, at its inception, cardiovascular diseases and ventures focused on cardiovascular diseases were there, right? They have the earliest average incorporation date of the major therapeutic areas within digital health is what you see in the table here. Cardio comes in at 2014. They don't have the greatest number of ventures that goes to mental health. The number of exits is somewhere around the middle, but when you come to maturity of ventures, of course, you have all those older ventures that gained a lot of experience. So you're hitting at one of the top average maturity scores with oncology topping cardiovascular diseases. So it's really, it started out digital health. And the reason for that is really because digital health started out with remote devices, right? It was connecting the devices to an app to track data and to collect data. And at the point where we start off here at the left hand of this chart, you really weren't doing that much with the data other than collecting it and recording it, right? So that's why you start out with things you already mentioned was big in those ventures that were incorporated before 2010. Moving forward in the timeline, right? Then from 2010 to 2015, then you started getting those devices, right, connected to some sort of monitoring apps, right, that collected the data and probably sent the data to your physician, right? So it's really that's how digital health evolved, right? Starting with the connected devices and then starting to do something with the data, and that's exactly what we see in cardio. Of course, 2016, 2019, then the ventures started incorporating that date, really started focusing on diagnostics, which is where we are, where we're seeing a lot of the activity going on now is in diagnostics using the AI for diagnostic tools. Of course, then you get to the very young ventures incorporated between 2020 and 2023 today, going back into patient solutions to do add the AI, right, to the data you're collecting, right, using that data for a lot more. So this is what you see the journey of cardiovascular diseases, where it was, where it is now, and it reflects a lot of what we know as digital health. And so that's why cardiovascular disease is interesting, because it really reflects the journey of digital health since inception, really.
Absolutely, and I guess many laymen are much more aware of heart disease and its various iterations through much of the press coverage, but also of course devices we can buy. So listen, that's great context. Before we move into the next obvious question, just want to remind everyone that we love your questions, so please feel free to ask questions. It helps steer our dialogue, as well as of course make sure that you have a chance to engage with us. So please feel free to ask questions. Use the Q&A button ideally so that we know it's a question. So Sarah, great. We understand the point of digital health being, I guess, a pioneer, or sorry, more specifically, CVD, cardiovascular disease, being a bit of a pioneer in leveraging digital health technology going forward. But cardiovascular disease itself is not really one single TA or therapeutic area. It's what I would describe as a super TA or a cluster TA. Can you define cardiovascular disease as we see it, so everyone understands that particular lens as well?
You're right, Julian. It is a huge area. So within Health Tech Alpha, which is our database of private digital health startups across the globe, we do break down cardiovascular diseases and are able to look at them one level lower, right? And that's split up into, if we look at all the cardio ventures that we have, right, you can see 19% of them focus on hypertension, 13% heart failure, 12% stroke, and then you go smaller percentages, but atrial fibrillation, 40 heart disease, right? There are ventures that some do stay at the top level, and that's what you see on the pie chart, right? 41% are maintaining a very general level of cardiovascular, but really a lot of ventures go to that next level, really being able to focus on a specific patient need. And not just a general patient population.
Of course, so the breakdown is clearly labeled on the left-hand side as we look at the different types, or the most common types, of cardiovascular disease. And of course, we look at that through that particular lens at the way in which the digital ventures that we're cataloging are declaring their focus. And of course, course, often enough, it's not just one of those TAs, as in, for example, hypertension. Okay, helpful. So now everyone has an understanding of the role digital health is playing, but also what lens we're using. Let me start with something that I think is really front of mind for everybody we're talking to in the digital health ecosystem at the moment, and that's the need for proof points. Great stories no longer. Pair therapeutics, of course, remind us loudly how a great story doesn't necessarily materialize. So, through proof points, one of the ones that we like to look at regularly, of course, is clinical evidence. What does clinical evidence look like in the world of digital health innovation in cardiovascular?
Yeah, and within Galen Growth, we look at clinical evidence in looking at very specific proof points for that venture. And those include regulatory approvals, clinical trials, and it also includes peer-reviewed publications, right? And that's the way that a venture can begin building confidence and building the evidence that its solutions are bringing a benefit to its target population. Cardiovascular diseases is one of those therapeutic areas that comes up on top. If you see the table on the left, it actually has the greatest share of ventures with evidence signal greater than 40. And that 40 is kind of our level. We say Galen Growth, that's when it has established some sort of clinical evidence. Either it has a regulatory approval, it has run a clinical trial, or it has multiple peer-reviewed publications. Cardiovascular disease, because a lot of the ventures focus on devices, remote devices, and diagnostics, those are areas that require clinical evidence. You can't really get around it when it comes to devices. And so therefore you see 30% of ventures in this area do have an established clinical strength. Across the globe, and here's where we're excited to see Europe comes up on top as far as the share of cardiovascular ventures with that evidence signal greater than 40, right? So the European ventures are excelling in making sure their ventures have proof points. And finally, looking across, staying within cardio, right? Looking across the different digital health clusters, on top, the clinical trials, the ventures that are focused on solutions in clinical trials, meaning some sort of decentralized clinical trials or data collection tools, half of them have some sort of clinical evidence, followed by diagnostics, remote devices, research solutions, and patient solutions, right? So really the areas that you would expect to see this type of evidence.
Absolutely. I'm always heartened to see that the European innovators have, for a little while now, been really focusing on being able to demonstrate with data, I guess, with evidence that they're able to deliver what their medical claims are. And so it comes back to this point that we keep making, that the digital health ecosystem in Europe is very promising and certainly should attract greater focus on, say, investors, for example. Which is an interesting segue point. Let me just remind everyone, please feel free to ask your questions. Use the Q&A button. We really want your questions, and they're very helpful in understanding your point of view, but also being able to address your points of clarity or your thinking, generally speaking. Funding, I guess, kind of a segue. When I was mentioning investors, very recently I saw a headline which is that Europe needs to stop being the incubator for the US. And then a lot of the finger pointing, of course, the fact that the investment landscape in Europe at a beyond the seed stage level is still somewhat on the scale, to be honest, versus the sheer level of innovation in the region. However, we recently reported Q1 2023 funding was down substantially quarter on quarter across all the regions. That means it includes Europe in that. I talked about pair therapeutics, I won't go on about that, but I mean, funding strength in Europe, as we last looked at it, was really around the 35-36% mark. All ventures have actually raised funding in the last 18 months. Now, it's across all ventures, not just cardiovascular. But let me ask you the question, which is, what is the state of funding in cardiovascular disease? Is it the forgotten brotherhood because everybody's into oncology and to AI and all that la-di-da these days, or is cardiovascular holding its own?
Cardiovascular seems to be slipping behind, unfortunately. Although I'm going to show you in a minute, when it comes to Europe is ahead of the curve, but I'll get there. Looking across the therapeutic areas, now we're comparing Q1 2023 to full year of the other year. So don't be quite alarmed that it's dropped so much. We're not comparing Q1 to Q1, rather full year to Q1. But you see cardiovascular diseases has fallen into the mixture of the other therapeutic areas, whereas it used to be always in the top 5, right? So it's really dropped this quarter. However, cardiovascular tends to have a weak Q1. Oncology has been on top across the globe for the past 5 years. But cardio, like I said, was always in the top 5. Now, what's happened if you look quarter on quarter is that really that funding has dropped. Q1 this year with 114 million total funding across the globe is pretty, it's really sad. I mean, you took the carpet out underneath of all those ventures' feet. Now you see Q1 2022 was also low, so we're hoping Q2 will pick back up, right? I'm an optimist. We have to keep up hope here. But what we really see is the drop, right, in the funding share, the value share across all global digital health funding. Cardiovascular was capturing 8-9% of that funding, and 2022 it dropped to 6%, and this Q1 has dropped to 5%. So that's what we see quite concerning as far as funding for cardiovascular ventures, right? We look at Galen Gross, we look at funding strength as far as who has raised in the past 12, 18, 24 months. And if they haven't raised in the past 18 months, it means they're going to start need some sort of funding injection. And what we see is when you look at all digital health, about 22%, let's look at 18 months, 38% have raised in the past 18 months. And in cardiovascular, that's only 35%, right? So it's really falling behind the general digital health ventures. And that's really, it's troubling in a lot of ways, but we're hoping to see that pick up in the next few months.
All right, okay. So obviously these guys are not all going to run out of funding at the same time. But we at Galen Growth kind of look at this worryingly because, of course, the average runway for any fundraise is about 18 months to 2 years, which means that we're seeing an increasing large number of digital ventures technically running out of funding. And of course, to remind everyone, we're looking solely at ventures that have traditionally declared their funding. So, of course, we're staying as close to evidence as we can. So these guys are feeling a bit of stress. What are we seeing, therefore, in the market happening as, I guess you could almost say, as an immediate consequence of this lack of funding?
Well, overall in digital health, we're seeing a lot of M&A, right? So that valuations are low and ventures are running out of funding. They're being acquired. In cardiovascular, I didn't even put in the M&A slide because also in M&A, we've only seen one this year so far. So, in Q1, I haven't looked at Q2 yet. I have to be honest. So anyway, so we can't even say there's a lot of M&A activity in cardiovascular, right? What we're seeing is ventures need to find another source of income or another source to keep going.
Yeah, well, watching that with interest, as you said, the mid-year report that we habitually publish is due out in, I think, the second week of July, all being well, and we'll be looking at that personally very closely because we're certainly seeing some of the TAs see an increase in M&A activity.
Absolutely.
And that's venture-to-venture M&A activity, which is quite exciting. But logical, I think it's that natural acceleration of the maturing of the ecosystem as we see it going forward. So is it all doom and gloom then in digital health, cardiovascular? I mean, we talked about funding stress, lack of funding, M&A is not happening. So are there some positives we can draw out from, digital health innovation in cardiovascular?
There is a light at the end of the tunnel. And there's the other source that a lot of ventures are turning to are partnerships, right? They're looking to partner, either venture partners, partnering with corporates in order to get their solutions into the market, start generating revenue, or to get some sort of partnership agreement, development agreements going on. Right. So that's the light at the end of the tunnel. Really, you see across all of digital health, and those are the blue plus the gray here. Partnerships are going up. Partnerships are on the rise. The gray is just the cardiovascular, really going up very quickly. Last year, this quarter or Q1, we've seen 57 partnerships already compared to 46 in Q1. That's great news, right? And we're staying pretty much steady. About 9% of all partnerships have been with cardiovascular ventures, right? Which is a much larger share than we consider. Cardiovascular ventures make up about 6% of the ecosystem. They're capturing 9% of the partnerships. So that's kind of our light in the tunnel. If we break that down, about a third of the partnerships are in medical diagnostics, 25% patient solutions. So those two areas are the biggest areas for cardiovascular, and they're capturing most of the partnerships. Now, those partnerships are with institutions, academia, and hospitals, followed by, like you said before, Julian, the venture-to-venture partnerships. So that's how it's broken down. Europe, pretty much taking its share, 15% share of global cardiovascular partnerships. So that's 15% of the partnerships that are announced by ventures are in with ventures that have been founded in Europe. So a good portion of those partnerships.
Cool. That's positive news. I think it's fair to say it's a trend across digital health, core, most important TAs, as we've seen so far in 2023. And so I'm expecting this to continue going forwards. It's certainly one of the major takeouts out of bio, which just happened in Boston. I was talking to quite a few people there who essentially told me that most of the conversation is around partnerships, not around investment, as the uncertainty continues to weigh heavily on both large organizations, the innovators, and of course, a lot of the investors are really focusing on their existing portfolio and making sure that the existing portfolio doesn't derail. If we drill a bit further into Europe and look at funding in Europe, because of course that really is the focus of today. So of course we're always bouncing to global to give context, but let's come back to Europe again, if I may. What does the investment landscape look like in Europe for innovators that are focused on cardiovascular disease?
Yeah, let's dive into Europe. What we see, let's a quick overview on what's on cardiovascular, right? In Europe, you have 135 ventures, currently private ventures in Europe, right? And these are ventures that were founded in Europe, of course. Compare that to the other two big markets, North America with 200 and Asia Pacific with 154. So it's quite comparative. The dollars invested, of course, is much lower in Europe than North America and Asia Pacific. But what you're going to see is that Europe is actually maintaining a much more steady investment compared to the rest of the global. Now, it's not only about investment, so understanding what else is going on and how is Europe comparing. We took an analysis of the apps, the cardiovascular apps. Of course, digital health is much more than just apps, but just to take a look, the gray is Europe, right? So Europe has certainly a large share. It's about half of what APAC and North America are producing, but still, right, those numbers of investment, those numbers in how many ventures, right? It really, Europe's not falling behind in that regard. And it's holding quite steady as far as the app, those products that it's bringing onto the market. And that's as, the number of apps is going up significantly year on year. So Europe is definitely keeping up. It has, the investment numbers are low. Investment in Europe is typically much lower than that in the US. The ticket sizes are lower, so it's not really a surprise. And what I want to do is jump here real quick and show you the funding itself. This is Q1 funding just for cardiovascular, right? But what we see is Europe is actually topping for Q1 in cardiovascular. And that, if you multiply 53 times 4, you're really going to get to those numbers in 2022. So what we see is it's not going down as much as perhaps the other regions are, holding a bit steady. So there's a lot of hope for European ventures as far as cardiovascular venture funding.
But we have a quick question, which says, would you mind breaking out broadly, of course, Europe and APAC, which countries are the major contributors? Of course, this particular presentation is not focused on Asia Pac, but we have a sense of which countries are the major contributors. Europe and Asia Pac is one that I guess we're going to encourage people to join us for the Asia Pac webinar, which is next week, I believe, which will really focus on that as well. But looking at Europe itself, I know you're getting there. That's why you're using the question. Which countries are the major contributors to innovation, as well as, of course, therefore attracting the attention of partners as well as investors?
Mm-hmm. What we see in Europe, you have two major countries coming up on top, and that's the United Kingdom with 22% of the ventures, France with 19% of ventures, right? So they're kind of vying for that top spot with of course Germany and Switzerland not too far behind. As far as venture funding distributed in the past 5 years, looking at the UK and France had quite a few nice funding rounds this or in Q1 of this year, and as well at the end of last year. You can see some of those examples of those ventures on the website. Excuse me, in the big report. So that should answer the question of who's on top as far as countries within Europe. You have a lot of the Nordics playing a bigger role as well, but those top 5 countries are really on the top. The general development in Europe, right? 6% of all ventures in Europe have solutions in cardiovascular diseases, right? So it's about the same share as you'll see in oncology and other therapeutic areas. And then there is still growing area, growing at 5-year CAGR of about 5%. So it seems to be slowing down at the moment, but we don't expect that trend to continue because it's certainly a growing area, just like the rest of digital health. 5% is what we see pretty much across the board for therapeutic areas in digital health. Right. So that's really a picture of digital health in Europe.
So I guess we've got a few minutes left. No questions at the moment. Sticking to the positive note, as we look at, of course, the last few months in digital innovation within cardiovascular disease, within Europe, which is our focus today. We talked about partnerships being let's say a shining light at the end of that tunnel. So who are the most prolific partners in digital innovation in cardiovascular in Europe?
To answer that question, Julian, I am going to take you guys into HealthTech Alpha,
please,
which is our platform, and we can answer exactly that question. We have the data split up, and any of you who have access or want to go do a pro trial, to access the data, you can go to the hot topics in the workspaces, which I've set up for today, and view exactly what's going on in cardiovascular for Europe. Here, I've used both private and public ventures. So any ventures that have IPO'd, they're mostly excluded from the report, but here I've kept them in. Not only the ventures, but you asked about partners.
Yeah.
So if we look at the partners, partnership distribution in particular, you see about almost 16% of the partnerships are with pharma companies, and that's reflected in the other, 34% is with institutions or some sort of health system or academia. And that's what we see coming up on top is NHS, as with 13 partnerships with cardiovascular ventures. The NHS does definitely come up on top as a preferred partner, and we saw as well the UK has one of the biggest is the biggest ecosystem at the moment. That's followed, of course, by biopharma companies, and then Mayo Clinic. Even the US health systems, right, are turning to European ventures. They're not afraid to come because they know there's a lot of innovation going on in Europe, coming to Europe and choosing partners here. Right. So that's the list of really who's partnering, and these companies will be carrying a lot of ventures through this venture funding drought.
Yeah. And of course, NVIDIA is the odd one out really in that group, and its partnerships to continue developing their chip technology within this particular disease area, particularly as we look at AI capability within each of these ventures. It's interesting to see that NVIDIA actually pops up usually in the top 10 to 15 prolific partners across all the core TAs. So very interesting to see that. We are running out of time. In fact, we're out of time. We want to respect the time contract we've had with everyone here. No further questions at this stage. So let me just remind everyone, this is just but a small snapshot of the full premium report, which is 70 pages of data, charts, tables, etc. You can easily access that premium report by just subscribing to the Pro license, which is I think $385 per month, and it gives you full access to this report, the premium version, as well as all the other premium reports. So it's actually quite a bargain for those of you who are looking to get rich data already analyzed, as well as access, for example, the workspace that Sarah is showing you at the moment. Next deep dive reports is our mid-year. So we will be deep diving into mid-year key trends in digital health for North America. Of course, that's mostly US, but there is a bit of Canada in there. Europe, as we just showed you today, and of course Asia Pac. We'll also be publishing a global key trends document, which will include, in addition to North America, Europe, and Asia Pac, we will be including Middle East and Israel, as well as Latin America and Africa. So pretty much a full global coverage, which is unique. Certainly looking at many of the other reports I'm seeing on digital health, many of the journalists are significantly underreporting the digital ecosystem, and therefore giving you only really a snapshot, fractional view of what's happening in digital health. So I would suggest to keep an eye on your email. You will be notified when those documents will be published. In the meantime, as you know, we publish every month. So last month was a focus on oncology. Okay, well, no further questions. Sarah, thank you very much for your gallop through, I guess. And feel free, anyone on this call, to obviously reach out to us directly at info@galengrowth.com with your questions or any other type of inquiry. We'll be happy to address it. As I said, next week, Asia Pacific. If you go to our website, our events page, you'll find the details of that webinar, particularly for the person who asked a question in relation to the key drivers in Asia Pac. And at the end of the month, we are doing the North America one, focused on the US. And that one has two very special VIP guests to get a point of view, of which one is a well-known cardiologist. So we'll be very keen to get their point of view as to the adoption of digital health in cardiovascular disease in the US. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, everyone. And see you all next at our next analyst briefing. Have a good day.